Right, so as you can see, if you watched my one of my later videos, you'll know that I got the Iflight Cinebee 75 HD. But mine either had a faulty flight controller or I soldered with too much heat. And the net result was that after messing around trying to get the receiver to work, I ended up lifting the pads for S-Bus. So I contacted iFlight and they've agreed to send me out a new flight controller, but it hasn't turned up. So in the meantime, I bought the little 16 by 16 stack because I kind of thought it might be useful for other things. And I fixed this guy. And this is the review I didn't really want to post, to be honest with you. I've held off posting it. And I've sort of put, must be a good 50 packs through this guy, trying various different things. And the long and the short of this, and I'm going to be pretty blunt and upfront, is if you've got 140 quid burning a hole in your pocket, don't buy this. It's simply not worth the money. For 140 quid, you could make yourself a relatively decent 3, 4 or 5 inch quad. But that aside, let's talk about this little guy and the reason why I was so excited to get it in the first place. So we've got a little 75mm whoop. This one has 1103. I think they're 10,000 kV motors, and they're good for 2 to 3S. The props are 40mm, and these are the HQ props it comes with. It also comes with some of these Gem Fan 1635 3-blade props as well, but we'll come on to that in a minute. And the reason why I like this is I felt it had been sort of designed around what it was trying to achieve, which was essentially a little HD whoop that would give you jello-free footage. So we've got this rather sort of nice carbon center frame, all of which has been really strong in my bashing. We've even got a little separate bumper at the front, and this guy is a top mounted battery, and you don't get props or anything like that in view. And one of the reasons I liked it is because if you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that whether it's the Cadex or the Runcam Split, etc., they're all really fragile. And I thought the idea of having, in this case, the Cadex Turtle V2 sat on the bottom, protected by this plastic cover, was a relatively nice idea because A, it kept the weight in line with the motors, and B, it kept it from getting snagged on branches or anything like that. Inside we've got 16 by 16 stacks, so we've got a little 12 amp 4-in-1 ESC, we've got a F4 flight controller, and we've got a 200 milliwatt max VTX, which is switchable via your OSD using the Tramp protocol. And up front, obviously, we've got the Cadex V2 camera, and this has got the newer glass lens as opposed to all the other ones which came with plastic lenses. So this is the special lens I tested in, well, very briefly in a video some time ago, and this is much better than the plastic lenses. So I was dead excited about this guy, and my excitement has quickly turned to disappointment. So if we go to the first sort of flight footage, I was relatively chuffed at this point. The original flight controller that came with this quad had been set up, but the PIDs were basically stock Betaflight PIDs. And on the flight controller that I subsequently bought to replace it, I have tried everything I can to get this little guy to fly well. So the first video you'll see is probably about the best video I've taken on it, and it is on a relatively, well, it's a bright day, but it's a little bit cloudy, and there's not a huge amount of jello or anything like that, and it all looks usable. And I've been running this guy on 2 and 3S. The 3S batteries that I got are the Tattoo 450s, which I think weigh about 44 grams. And the 2S batteries that I've been using are these little Nanotech 300 mAh, which probably weigh about sort of 14, 15 grams, something like that. And what I've been finding is on 2S, the quality of video that I've been getting has been a lot higher. On 3S, the quad sort of shakes like mad, albeit it has a lot more power. Quad itself weighs 68 grams, so it's a hefty weight for essentially a whoop. You're looking at pretty much 20 odd grams, possibly a little bit more heavier than the modular, and you're looking at sort of almost 3 times the weight of a 65mm 1S whoop, all of which are running the same size props. And I think there lies its problem. On 2S it flies okay, albeit very slowly, and you can potentially get okay HD footage. On 3S it's got a lot more power, but this quad has got this sort of issue where it basically almost rocks from side to side, and I've done everything I possibly can to remove it. And I suspect in this case on 3S 450 more, they're simply too heavy, and this weird sort of rocking sensation gets worse if you sort of fly in any sort of wind, which, as I live in Norfolk, there's generally a pretty steady breeze. But so most of my footage has been on 2S, and on 2S it basically has all of the worst characteristics of a whoop. So if you do any sort of rolls or anything like that, it can suddenly yaw, wash out, and you sort of lose control while you try and fight it back, simply because it's too heavy and hasn't got enough power. On 3S that sort of dies away a little bit, but this horrible rocking sensation appears, and I've tried a million different tunes to try and get rid of it, but I've never really succeeded. It seems to fly best on what I would consider crazy high PIDs, so sort of P and I in the sort of 70s and 80s. If you drop those P and I levels down to sort of 30 or 40, it comes alive, but sadly the end result is the HD video gets worse. So I'm kind of really frustrated with it. Even when it's flying well and you're using 2S and you're flying really slow so it doesn't vibrate, the throttle or the motors or the powertrain, whatever you want to call it, is so unpredictable that it's so hard to fly smoothly. Any sort of slight movement, like you'll come into a tree and you'll yaw and the quad can literally drop, or you take off, it just has no accuracy, and it makes it really irritating to fly. Most of my video has jello in it, and that could be one of two things. Maybe this quad is just susceptible to jello. Mine hasn't had any damage or anything like that. Or two, and possibly more likely, the HQ props are infinitely better than the Gemfan props when it comes to jello. But I suspect, because they're so fragile and thin, that the slightest, you land on grass and you don't disarm quick enough, it's essentially knocking them out of balance really, really quickly. Whereas the Gemfan are far more sturdy, but they're just, you can't film HD footage on these. They're just not balanced well enough, and that applies to the 4-blade version, which I've tried as well. So the HQ props are by far the best ones, but unless you're filming on a very cloudy day, you're going to probably get more jello in your feed than with the HQs. And the reason why I haven't replaced these is because HQ want £2 for 4 little props, and frankly I think that's a bit of a rip-off when Gemfan sell you the double the number for the same price. So to sum this little guy up, my thoughts are, it's difficult to recommend this to anybody. It's hard to fly. On 2S it flies okay for its purpose, which is to fly slow and do cinematic stuff, but even then it's pretty hard to fly comfortably. I have messed around with the PIDs tons, but what I also did is add a throttle curve in, because stock on 2S, you've got to run 60-65% throttle to get this guy to hover, and I'm just not comfortable flying at that high stick level. So I applied mid throt of 1 and throttle expo of 0.7, I think, which pushes the power curve up, and it will then hover around 40%, which is what I'm familiar with. But even then, I just can't recommend this to anybody. It's really hard to fly. It suffers from washout. On 3S, it's got a lot more power, but it vibrates. And I just don't know where it's coming from, because the frame itself seems relatively sound. But disappointingly, while you've got this sort of carbon midsection, the ducts which hold the motors are all plastic. So you're not really getting any sort of greater stability than you would do on a normal whoop, albeit I've sort of crashed this guy a number of times and nothing has broken. The only sort of slight thing I haven't tested, which I'm wondering about, is I suspect the best battery for this guy is going to be 3S, probably 300 mAh or 350 mAh, and on that sort of size battery, if you can get one light enough, it will probably be a good compromise of lots of power, but a little bit more weight to keep it steadier. But as I said, I can't confirm that, and frankly I'm not going to go out and spend £8 a pop on multiple batteries to test, frankly, a quad that I simply don't like, and it doesn't make me happy to say that. All the recent Iflight stuff I've had has been great. The frame itself feels really good quality. The little stack inside for 16x16 has performed really well. You know, I haven't blown an ESC or anything like that, despite numerous crashes. But the bottom line is, it just doesn't fly very well. You know, and if you want to do cinematic stuff, the one thing you've got to have is a quad that will hover comfortably and maneuver slowly comfortably. And as I said, it's just difficult to get it to maintain a steady height. And if you give it sort of any power, because you're running such high P and I gains, or mortally I gains, to keep it sort of steady enough to do that slow stuff, the minute that you punch out, you've got sort of minor oscillations, etc. So yeah, so sadly, another whoop that I hate. I think if you went into this actually and you wanted a whoop to do nothing but indoor stuff without any wind, which it can't handle even the lightest of breeze without sort of drifting off course. If you went into this and you wanted a little quad, 75mm, to do indoor HD footage without any wind and flying very slowly, then this is possibly a quad for you. But for me, it's just, even on that basis, it's a hell of an expensive one-trick pony. And in fact, it's so imprecise and so difficult to fly that I could probably pilot my 6-inch into tighter gaps than this, because it's not going to suddenly drop or take off, or the minute that I yaw, it's not going to try and hit the ground. It's just frustrating to fly. So I've come into this video, I don't know what everybody else has said about it. You know, perhaps mine's faulty in some way, but I can't really see how. As I said, I suspect the jello is down to these props, which are very weak, but I can't confirm that. But frankly, I'm not prepared to spend, you know, another 30 or 40 quid on batteries to test something that may or may not work. The only other thing is, and this is kind of a disappointing thing, I don't know if anybody's seen these, but Cadex have released ND filters, which, if you're trying to get decent HD footage out of one of these Cadex turtles, is a nifty thing, but sadly it doesn't fit on this newer lens. But it would be relatively easy to just apply a dab of plastic glue around this existing lens and then basically just sit that on top, and the quality of your HD footage would be a lot better. Having said that, I think the footage that out of this guy is pretty good. Its major weakness, like all these HD cams, is that the FPV feed is rubbish. Although it's a little bit better and a little bit sharper with this glass lens than it was on the previous plastic lens. So yeah, that's it. Bit of a waffly review video. Wish I loved it. There are so many things that I like in here. The way it all goes together, the way that you've got this little antenna mount. It should have antenna tubes, but of course they fell off within 2 seconds. So if you get one of these and you want to use them, make sure you glue them in. Personally, I hate them, so I've just left mine as it is. And as you can see, the minute that you land on any sort of grass, it just hoovers them up. So yeah, really disappointed. What potentially could have been a very little quad, but it's just limited and restricted by its very nature. It's hugely heavy for a whoop. The ducks make it fly really, really badly. So end result, to finish this off, if you want to get one of these and you want to run 3S, make sure your batteries are very light, 300 mAh. Don't be surprised if you get jello in bright sunlight. It's not an acro quad, even on 3S. It feels heavy for a whoop in the air, which of course it is, being a good 20 grams lighter than the Mobula, etc. It will probably give you better HD footage than the Mobula, which is really prone to jello. Most of the what you would call jello in the video, I think, is vibration basically from the props. And for 140 quid, I think you'd be throwing your money down the drain. And if you're new to this hobby, avoid it like the plague. You know, spend 50 quid on a little cheap whoop to bash around indoors, or spend the same amount of money and buy yourself a TBS Source 1, some cheap motors and a flight controller, and actually learn to fly properly. So yeah, pretty damning review. Wish I didn't have to make it. Sorry to Iflight, because all your other stuff has been great, but in my opinion, this one isn't. Cheers guys, thanks, bye bye.